Dr. Alicia Deal is a drinking water specialist with a master's and PhD in drinking water treatment. Starting in 1997, she worked for the TCEQ in various compliance and assistance roles. Since retiring in 2016, she has been a contractor on the Texas Optimization Program. Andy Waite is a contractor of UTA working for TCEQ with the TOP program. Andy has worked for the EPA in the drinking water section, administering drinking water rules for 26 years. He administered the disinfection byproduct rule for Oklahoma until they obtained primacy, and was the rule manager for the revised total coliform rule. Andy also has years of experience doing sanitary surveys and optimization work with states and tribes. Please welcome Alicia Deal and Andy Waite.
Thank you for that introduction, David. So we're going to talk about chloramines today. How many of you here in the audience have managed, worked with, talked to somebody, or drank water that was chloraminated? Yeah, it's all over the place, isn't it? So we're gonna go over some of the basics of chloramines today, and of course, just the basics will get you started, and I hope you'll be interested and learn some more. So background, history, pros and cons. Little chemistry, that breakpoint curve, man, that is going to be your friend when you try and figure out what the heck is going on if you're trying to manage chloramines in a distribution system. Sample collection, pretty key. Gotta do it, and gotta do it in the way that you figure is best for you. Sites and schedules, kind of related to sample collection. This doesn't cover the nitrification action plan, so hang around for another 45 minutes if you want to hear a little bit more about nitrification. So let's start. We say chloramines all the time, right? But what the heck does that mean? Chloramines are important because Texas requires every public water system to maintain a disinfectant residual throughout the entire distribution system. Does every state in the United States require that? Yes, no. No, about 23 states require that, but it's something that's being discussed at the EPA level right now. So there's two allowed disinfectants, right? Free chlorine, our good old friend free chlorine, and then chloramines. Both of these are families of chemicals. The free chlorine family is made up of two chemicals, hypochlorous acid, hypochlorite ion. Which of these is a better disinfectant? Is hypochlorous the disinfectant? Yes. Or is hypochlorite the disinfectant? Yes. So we had some yeses on the first one. Hypochlorous acid is the one we love for free chlorine, right? For chloramine, and now when we put our DR300 or whatever out there and measure free chlorine, it measures both of those. Okay, and it doesn't tell you which one it's measuring. It measures the combined hypochlorous acid and hypochlorite ion as Cl2. And so we love hypochlorous acid. I mean, hypochlorite ion is not bad, but we don't love it like a disinfectant. So the chloramines are also a family. We have three in this family. We have monochloramine, dichloramine, and trichloramine, right? And the way to kind of get a feeling for those guys is monochloramine is our friend. We love it. It's a disinfectant. It hangs around and kills pathogens. Dichloramine, when we talk about dichloramine, we kind of, it's like monochloramine is the friend at the Thanksgiving dinner who comes and brings a side dish and hangs around and talks nice to your kid and leaves on time, right? Dichloramine, when we talk about dichloramine, we're a little bit, ew. They come a little late to our Thanksgiving dinner, don't bring a side dish, maybe start an argument, with your kids or your uncle or something. So we're like, dichloramine, not so much. Trichloramine, when we're talking about trichloramine, we're like, ew. This is the uncle that shows up really late and drunk in the middle of dinner, doesn't bring anything, falls asleep on the couch, and you have to kind of poke him to get out of there at 11 p.m. So not your favorite guest. So we love monochloramine. And when we say chloramines, we're talking about the sum of all three. And of course, we measure it using total chlorine. But let's talk a little bit about the history. Why are we even talking about chloramines? We have a history of chloramine use in Texas. Actually, it's a great tool. It's a great disinfectant. When people think about which is the stronger disinfectant, they want to say free chlorine, but truthfully, they're both very adequate disinfectants. Austin, the city of Austin, where we are now, they were chloraminating as early as the 1950s. During the World War II, people were not chloraminating primarily because they couldn't get the chemicals. They were all being used for the war effort at that time, like many things. But Austin started in the 50s, and a lot of surface water treatment plants or systems using water treated at a surface water treatment plant had to start in the 80s. So the large system started in the 80s when the first trihalomethane rule came out. And one thing about chloramines versus free chlorine is free chlorine makes a lot of trihalomethanes, right? And so chloramines were a solution to that problem. Smaller systems, the DBP rules started rolling in 2002 and 2004, and so they kind of followed. And here we are today in 2024, maybe about half of the water that you'll drink in Texas is chloraminated. There's about 7,000 public water systems in Texas. Of those, there's about 400 that actually have a surface water treatment plant. And most of those surface water treatment plants use chloramines in the plant so you don't form the trihalomethanes. And a lot of those surface water treatment plants don't just serve themselves, but pass that water on downstream. Anybody here working at a purchased water system? Yeah, several people are purchasing water and redistributing it. So there's actually about 1,000 or more systems that are purchased water systems purchasing chloramine water and passing it on to their customers. Some groundwater, if you're in Northeast or even on the Gulf Coast, you've got a groundwater that actually has raw ammonia in it. And what's more, in the Northeast especially, that groundwater has a ton of total organic carbon in it, which is the stuff that kind of forms the trihalomethanes when you chlorinate it with free chlorine. Okay, well that's a problem, and so some of that well water needs to be chloraminated as well, haha. So that raw water ammonia is a problem. Well, it's a problem, but then again, some folks have figured out how to make it a solution because they figure out how much they've got, and then that's free chemical, and so they don't have to spend as much on ammonia, so it's a win. Pros and cons, well, one pro that I haven't mentioned yet is this stuff lasts forever. The free chlorine goes away in days. Chloramines go away in weeks, okay? So we are a big state. I think that's one of the things people know about Texas is it's big as heck. And so y'all are operating some really long water lines. And so you get water ages, week, 2 weeks. You're really happy if you've got chloramines because you can maintain a residual. Obviously, already mentioned that when you use chloramines instead of free chlorine, you get less of those undesirable disinfection byproducts like trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. Now, a con is, you could say you're going to spend a little bit more on chemicals, right? Because you have to hold a little bit higher residual. What's the minimum residual for free chlorine? Excellent, 0.2. What's the minimum residual for total chlorine when you're using chloramines? Right on, good job, 0.5. The biggest problem with the chloramines is there's this potential issue with nitrification, that there's this biological process that can happen in a chloraminated system that doesn't happen in a free chlorine system. And that can cause loss of residual, which is really undesirable. But of course, the big con is you have to learn a little bit more chemistry. Now, some of us like that stuff, but some of us are kind of aggravated by that. So chloramine chemistry, we describe it using the breakpoint curve. And we're going to start by saying, how was that discovered? Well, back in about the 1930s, the wastewater guys were finally catching up with the drinking water guys, right? Because we had started free chlorinating water in about 1908, 1913, specifically in the city of Austin, right? When Vic Ehlers came back from back east with his new fancy degree and decided, yeah, typhoid fever is not a good thing. And so 1930s roll around, and the wastewater guys are like, well, I want to go fishing downstream from this wastewater plant, but all the fish are dead. And so they started thinking, well, let's do like the drinking water guys and stick some chlorine in this water so we kill out, some of those bugs that are, making our water so nasty in the river, and maybe we can get some bass. So they looked at what they were doing. They went down to the water plant and stole some chlorine from those guys, borrowed it, whatever, and started trying this out. And what they expected to see when they added chlorine, well, first question, does wastewater have ammonia in it? Oh yeah. Yeah, you betcha. And so they expected, well, we're going to add chlorine to this water, and we're going to see the chlorine residual go up. And the analytical method that they had available at that time, they had total chlorine, just like we use today, total chlorine, DPD method, the pink method. And they expected they'd put more in and it'd keep going up. Maybe a little demand there, but what they saw was that as they increased the amount of chlorine they were adding to that water that had the ammonia in it, right? They see it go up for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, at some point, it drops. Now, these wastewater guys, they want a solid residual. So they go up, they see that drop, and they keep pushing past that break point to get them a good residual, right? And so they called this the breakpoint curve because they're trying to get past that point where the dip, the breakpoint happens. But this was total chlorine, and that was the method they had at that moment in time. And so there was a lot of folks trying to figure out what was going on. So understanding that breakpoint curve is key to figuring out what's going on with chloramines. So let's talk real quick about the x-axis and y-axis on that breakpoint curve. The y-axis, of course, is residual, and we've just put total chlorine on that breakpoint curve so far. That's the main line we talk about. So that's the sum. When we measure the total chlorine in our little pink test, DPD, we are measuring all active chlorine species, all added up, right? And so that'll be the mono, di, trichlorine, free chlorine, all the active chlorine species we're talking about. We're going to graph other things in a minute, but that total chlorine line is the one we talk about. The x-axis is the chlorine to ammonia nitrogen ratio. We measure all the species that have N, nitrogen in them, as N, so they're more comparable, right? And that's a requirement of TCQ and also a good idea. So let's talk about the chemistry. Let's make some of these chemicals. So here's how we make monochloramine. We're going to take down there at the front, you see hypochlorous acid and ammonia. Those are the things we're going to put in. And when those react, we're going to get monochloramine NH2Cl, one chlorine on there, okay? So let's watch this chlorine, superreactive chlorine, on the hypochlorous acid up top. It's going to attack one of the hydrogens on the ammonia, push it off, and stick itself on. And what do we have left over, though? We have water left over. Monochloramine's our friend, so we really want to understand that relationship. So let's talk about how we get that monochloramine versus other chemicals. So here we are at the chloramine bar. And at the chloramine bar, it's about 8 o'clock at night. And in walks all of the little ammonias, right? And they've got their hydrogens all set, all nice, and they're ready for a pleasant evening at the chloramine bar. And about 9 o'clock, chlorine comes in, and he sees an ammonia down at the end of the bar, and he's like, oh, I'm going to talk with that ammonia right there. And they talk to each other, and they get along real well, and they form monochloramine. Well, about 9:30, another chlorine walks in, finds an ammonia to chit-chat with, and they're getting along like wildfire, and you know, the evening progresses, and by midnight, by about 11:30, all of those ammonias have met a nice chlorine, and they're all formed monochloramine, and everybody's happy, and the music is playing. Well, a little after midnight, another chlorine walks in. There's no ammonias left, right? So what's going to happen? Well, to meet an ammonia, the fights are going to break out, right? And he's going to have to knock chlorine off of some ammonia, and all those ammonias are going to be mad at the fight. You know, they don't like that, and they're going to leave and go home. So up to the point where there's one chlorine for one ammonia, we're making monochloramine. When we get a little extra chlorine, the fights break out. And so what that looks like is early in the evening, the bar is cleaning up, and the chlorine is reacting with natural iron and manganese and other instantaneous demand chemicals, so nothing happens. Then in zone 2, we're seeing that 9 through about 11:30 at the chloramine bar, and everybody's getting along, we're forming monochloramine. At that mountain, just after that, one extra chlorine walks in, and oh, the fights break out, and we're making dichloramine and trichloramine, and things are not good. It's unstable water. And then we wind up in the free chlorine zone. So in zone 1, added chlorine reacts rapidly with these demand chemicals, right? But then in zone 2, this is where we're really happy, because the chlorine to ammonia nitrogen ratio is between 0 to 1 and 5 to 1, and we're forming monochloramine. This is where we want to be. If we get a little past that, we get into what we're calling zone 3, and now the fights are breaking out. Another chlorine is getting stuck onto that nitrogen, so that there'll be 2 and then 3 chlorines stuck on that nitrogen, and there'll be dichloramine and trichloramine. And remember, we don't like those guys. They're stinky, they don't last very long, and they're not disinfectants, which is what we're trying to do. And this is where, if we were the wastewater folks, we'd be happy to be there. We get to zone 4. We've knocked out all the nitrogen has all left the chloramine bar. We're left with free chlorine at that point, which is where the wastewater folks want to be. But do the drinking water folks want to be there? Well, no, heck no. The whole reason we went to total chlorine, the whole reason we went to chloramines, was we'd have a long-lasting residual and not form the undesirable disinfection byproducts, right? So in zone 4, we're at free chlorine, and that's not where we want to be, unless we're doing a free chlorine conversion, which some of y'all, anybody do free chlorine conversions occasionally? Yeah, totally. So then it's okay. So what do you need to measure? Let's talk about chloramine effectiveness sampling. So free chlorine versus total chlorine. First of all, we said that free chlorine analysis measures both family members, right? So we're looking at hypochlorous acid and hypochlorite ion as chlorine when we do that. Total chlorine analysis measures the sum of all the mono, the di, and the trichloramines. Both free and total chlorine are measured as chlorine, so we can compare those, across the way, because they're both the same chlorine Cl2. So when we put together the breakpoint curve and we stick all these on top of each other, we get the breakpoint curve details. And I am going to turn it over to Mr. Andy Waite.
Hi, I'm Andy, and I'm hopefully, so again, this is just the plot of the different zones. These are the monochloramines. This is what the monochloramines will look like as you add it in continuing increasing dosages. Then, as you add more, we start getting the dichloramines. Again, this is at after midnight, right? You start getting those fights in the bar. And then a little bit later, when it gets really close to closing time, you're getting those trichloramines. You can see that there's not a whole lot of them based in comparison to the other ones, but they are, in fact, for me, very odoriferous. They don't last a real long time, but you can really tell if they're there. And then we have the free chlorine. And you'll notice the free chlorine, there's not any free chlorine until you get all the way out there, right, past like 10 to 1. And that's what gives us the breakpoint curve. And obviously, if we're doing chloranimation, we want to be in this one, we'd call it zone 1, right, as opposed to zone 0. And we probably want to be somewhere up close towards the top of it so that we're getting a good disinfectant. But what can we measure when we're actually looking for this stuff? Can we measure the dyes and the tris? No, I don't have that. Maybe you guys do, but you'd have to have like a really fancy lab. You maybe looked at some of that when you're doing your doctoral thesis, right? But it's a pain. What we can look at is we can look at the total chlorine, we can look at the monochloramine, and we can look at the free chlorine, right? And that's really not a million different tests. The other thing that we can look at, and to me this is our saving grace, we can measure ammonia, okay? Because without ammonia, I think we'd be lost trying to figure out how to do this chloranimation stuff. It would be really tough for us. So if we're looking at total chlorine, we can measure the total chlorine, and we measure it, and it's 1.5 milligrams per liter, right? So that's all we measured. That's all we know about. Can we tell where we are on the breakpoint curve? It's someplace, but can we really tell? No, because it could be any of those places, right? So we got to do something else. So we have another tool at our disposal. We can look at the monochloramines, right? We have it here at a 1.2 ratio, and now we have a little bit more information, right? But we're still kind of dragging because we're not quite sure where we are. Again, we want to be on that uphill part of the curve, and we now have that data, but we still aren't sure where we are. Again, our savior, the Superman, comes in, and by golly, we can check for free ammonia. Yay. And it's not a whole lot, but the test is real sensitive and it works really well. Yay. And we test for it, okay, and we get an idea of what it is, and it's 0.3. Now do we know where we're at? Absolutely. We have it there. By God, ta-da, now we know where we're at. And that's why you have to measure all three of them all the time in order to be able to get an idea of where you really are on the breakpoint curve and where you want to be, right? So what do you need to measure? Total chlorine, monochloramine, and the ammonia. The ammonia is, again, that's our Superman test. It lets us know exactly where we're at. I guess maybe it's the X-ray vision part of it, right? All right, these are the chloramine effectiveness group, and that's what we need to be able to test. Let's look at how we go about doing collection and analysis. There's common ones, right? The DBP is for total and free chlorine. Indophenol is for the mono and the ammonia. And the thing is that with the mono and the ammonia, you have to do that in succession. You'll do the same sample over time so you can figure it out, because what it is remember, the mono is the blank for the ammonia. Going forward, put that in the back of your head and we'll think about it, right? To get good data, you really need to follow the instructions. We have seen stuff where, okay, they think they're doing everything right, but they have a higher ammonia level and they're not adding the right amount of chemicals. Or they're doing a different test and they don't have the right cell in, or they're not diluting it correctly. Okay, there's lots of ways that you can booger it up. Is that a real word? Can I get to say that? All right, and then you end up with information that's just you can't figure out where you're really at, and you really want to figure out where you are and where you are in zone 1. So it's important to make sure. I mean, every time. It's just one of those little cards. Just read it every time. And I know it gets boring and I know it gets repetitive, but I really would stress that even though you've been doing it for 25 years, read the card every time so that you make sure you know what you're doing. When you're actually collecting the samples, you want to collect the samples at that point in the distribution system, right? Not someplace else. So you want to make sure that you're not getting it in the service line, right? But you also want to make sure that you're not getting it a block away. All right? So generally the rule of thumb is about 2 times the amount of time you would think to get that service line flushed. So you're getting water that's pretty close to right there where you think you're sampling, because that's what you want to do. Otherwise, again, your data isn't as useful if you have a problem. If you're doing all of this and you never have a problem and life's good and everything's fine all the time, it doesn't matter. But that is not the real world. The real world is that we eventually have problems. And dilution, right? I talked about this a little bit. If you have overrange on the ammonia, you're going to have to do some dilution. And it's important, again, it's golly by golly, it's in that little instruction book, but you want to make sure that you're using deionized water, make sure that it doesn't have anything in it when you do your 50-50 mix. Then when you go through and you actually do the test, again, you're going to have to test for both, because again, the mono is the blank for the ammonia. You've got to do that, otherwise, where we are. And then you have to remember to go ahead and multiply it by 2 so that you can go ahead and get the results that you want. Sites and schedules. It's really important that when you're actually collecting the samples that you're collecting them at reasonable points. You don't want to collect them all just at Frank's house because that's where he lives. You don't want to take them all right next to the plant because that's easier and you don't have to go anywhere. You can just step outside, right? They have to be representative of the distribution system, and more importantly, you know, like the chlorine is supposed to be representative of the distribution system. With this stuff, you want to make sure that you're tracking where there could be trouble spots, right? That's what you really want to look at. I used to be from the EPA, and I used to be here to help, and I got to tell you that the regulatory monitoring is always the lowest bar. Okay, that's what RegNeg, regulation negotiation, got, and it's generally the very lowest bar. If you're trying to actually manage your water system, you're going to have to do more process testing than is required by law. You just got to do it, otherwise you're not going to be able to figure it out. Yeah, there's lots of testing, but even that, it's really not enough for what you need to do to be able to manage your water system. Some of the things you want to do is, well, whether you're purchasing water or whether you're getting well water, it's worthwhile to test that source occasionally to make sure that there's not ammonia in your feed water, in the water that's coming out, because that will, again, booger up your calculations, right? You'll think, oh, I'm adding this much, and no, you're adding too much because there's more ammonia than you think there is. You want to look at it before and after dosing so that you can actually check, okay, this is what I think I'm starting with, and this is what I think I'm ending with. I've seen it in surface water treatment plants where it's tough for them to make sure that they have sampling points that are good for being able to determine that. If you have a plant, and especially if you're ever doing any renovations and stuff like that, be like ducks on a June bug with those engineers about, I need to have sampling points. It's much better to have 3 sampling points that you never use than to have 1 sampling point that you wish you had. Just saying. You want to do stuff at in the distribution system, and you want to look at sites that are problematic, right? Like after tanks, places where you might have low flow, or places where historically had some issues with stuff. Again, let's look at some of those critical points. I think I already beat some of this up, where water quality could change. And tanks, you know, if it sits in a tank for a while, you know it's gonna change. You also, I talked about the sources, you got to do that. Whether it's a groundwater source or it's a surface water source, especially in some of these areas where you get a change in your water quality when you go into drought conditions or when you go into flooding conditions, you want to make sure that you're checking your source waters. It's not just for surface waters. Well waters need to look at those too. Of course, I already talked about you want to look at it in the plants, entry points to the distribution system, Whether that you're purchasing or whether it's from your own plants, you want to do that. If you have both, if you're buying some water and you have wells you need to make sure you're checking both of them, because that makes your job a little bit harder, because then you got two kinds of things coming in there and you got to make sure they're all on the same page. Some distribution examples are talked about: tanks, high-risk areas, places where you might have long water age, places where they are building the apartments, but they haven't finished building out, or they've stopped building the apartments, but you haven't cut off the stuff because it's going to be destroyed, right? You want to look at those long-term, long-age places. You want to make sure that you're checking in all of those pressure planes, not just where it's convenient for you. And sometimes that's a real, you got to do some driving. You got to make sure. Weekly, representative of the entire distribution system, at least. Spread out the system's going to need a whole lot more, especially some of those, who's got one of those spaghetti systems that goes like 15 miles between service connections? There's some of them out there in West Texas that go like 50 miles, and then there's another service connection. You have to be a little more diligent in areas like that, because the problem is nitrification, it can take hold. And when it takes hold, it blooms, and then you have a real problem. Then you've got to do something, and all of a sudden you're thinking about, oh, I've got to do a burn, I've got to notify everybody. Okay, I got to talk to TCQ about that. I've got paperwork to do. I got to spend more chemicals. So you don't want to do that. Let's look at some sample sites. This is showing up, hopefully, is this is the one where I was talking about. Can you see those little bitty sample points? They're kind of okay. No, see, that's the old one. These are the ones that maybe we should be taking. She thought she knew what I was saying. But the thing is, you want to make sure they may not be your total coliform sampling sites. They may be different, okay? But look at that carefully when you're developing your NAP, because you want to make sure, what was it that they said? Anybody, Barney Fife? Anybody? Right? You got to be a bud nipper. You want to nip this stuff at the bud, right? You do not want to have a bloom take hold. You want to take care of it before that goes on. That's kind of the take-home message. The whole testing for chloramines, it's a really important tool to help us figure out what's going on in our water system so we don't end up with issues. We want to help the system meet your regulatory requirements, but more important, you want to make sure that you're keeping water safe for all the people who are actually drinking it, right? Because it'll help maintain that stable residual, and that long-lasting residual is what you want. You've gone through all the problems of making sure that the water's good to drink. You don't want to booger it up because you didn't do this part. You've already done all the hard work. And monitoring, it really is. It's the key to success. If you're not doing it regularly and you're not looking at it for trends, right? A once-time snapshot might give you some idea if you haven't done it, and all of a sudden you say, oh, I've got an issue. But you need that long-term trend to be able to look at it and say, oh, this is what's happening. So you can spot, right, nitrification in the early stages when you can address it, as opposed to, oh, the whole system's boogered up. I like that word, boogered up. We want to look for for total chlorine, monochloramines, and our Superman, free available ammonia, so that you know what's going on in your distribution system.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so we do have some time for questions. If you have a question, anybody? Yes, sir.
In a distribution system, if your pH starts dropping, is that going to increase the breakdown from monos to dyes?
That's a great question. pH, we didn't talk about pH because this is just an intro, but these chloramines, they're way more stable at high pH. Like for free chlorine, you want hypochlorous acid at low pH. For chloramines, you want the high pH for stability. So if you happen to have a source water change of pH dropping, it's going to make those chloramines less stable, absolutely. Right?
Alicia, can you define low pH and high pH?
You bet. Yeah, good question, David. So some of y'all probably know that what our secondary standard is at TCQ in Texas for pH, the lowest pH you're supposed to be running at. Anybody want to shout that out? 7. Yeah. So anything under 7's definitely a low pH, but truthfully, for chloramines, you're way better off. Yeah, no, and it's illegal. And 7.5, 8 is going to be your friend. If you're running at 8.3 or something, you're going to be in pretty good place for you. Okay.
Let's give Andy and Alicia a good big thanks.